Thanks, Ben. And thank all of you for who have led in our worship service this morning. Good morning, by the way. Good morning. Jason, thank you for the songs. Appreciate all of you who take the time to plan and prepare and make our worship what it is. Thank you for being here. Welcome to our guests. Appreciate you being with us today and looking forward to studying with you this morning as we are going to be here in Matthew chapter 8 for the next few moments. We are already into June. Can you believe that? The year is flying by, 5 months already completed. And as we go through the month of June, what we're going to be doing is turning our attention to the Gospel of Matthew, and it is our desire over the next 5 weeks to look at 5 of the miracles of Jesus' work that are listed throughout this Gospel. Our theme this month is called Faith in Action. And what attracted me to all the passages that we'll be studying this month is really the faith-filled response of each of the people that Jesus came into contact with as he worked these miracles. And what it shows as we go through this is the willingness of these people to ignore societal norms and their willingness to come up to Jesus and to actually ask for help. It demonstrates, I believe, their great humility and dependence on God. And all of these approach Jesus. They're empty of any self-worth. They cast themselves on Jesus with their whole hearts. In just about every case, Jesus is moved with compassion and makes remarks about their faith. And so over the next 5 weeks, this is our game plan as we go through Matthew's Gospel. Much of the next 4 weeks are going to be here in Matthew chapter 8 and chapter 9. And then at the end of the month, Lord willing, we'll wrap up the month by looking at a Canaanite woman's faith in Matthew chapter 15. So I would encourage you over the next 5 weeks, bring a friend, bring a neighbor, bring someone to church with you, and let them be able to experience worship at Kettering and make this time set aside every week for God. There are 9 miracles in Matthew chapter 8 and 9. And all of these 9 miracles demonstrate the credentials of the Messiah. Each one of these miracles can be divided into groups of 3. The first 3 cover primarily physical needs. The second 3 address more spiritual needs, and by the time we get to the last set of 3, Jesus is dealing with mankind's greatest problem, that is overcoming death, raising someone from the dead. And I want to take you back as you go into Matthew 8 here. I hope your Bibles are open there. I want to look at the first set of 3 miracles that occur between verse 1 and verse 17. And there are 4 things that stand out in each one of these 3 miracles. As Jesus is dealing here with the person with leprosy, he's going to be talking to a person that has been paralyzed, and he's going to heal Peter's mother-in-law who has a fever. And in each one of these cases, Jesus is dealing with a person at the lowest level of human need. And one of the things that is remarkable about all 3 of these is how Jesus demonstrates sympathy and pity on those who are in very bad situations. The other characteristic we see of these first 3 miracles is how Jesus responds to various appeals that are made. And I think this demonstrates Jesus' compassion. And it shows the response of his heart. And it's really his response to the heart of the individuals that are out there. He tells the leper that he's going to make him clean. He tells the centurion that he's going to come to his house. He tells Peter's family that he's going to heal Peter's mother. So Jesus responds to human appeals. The other thing we see with these 3 miracles is how Jesus moves on his own will. As Ben read just a minute ago, Jesus says, "I will be clean." And you see the same thing with the centurion's servant, and you see it again with Peter's mother. Jesus moving on his own will. And then finally, the 4th thing you see in these 3 miracles is Jesus touching people at the lowest level of human existence. Think of each of the characters in Matthew 8, 1 through 17. You have a leper. The only thing worse in Jewish society was to be touching a dead body. He heals a leper here. Then you have a Gentile who would have been considered unclean just for being in existence, from handling forbidden things and all kinds of things. And then a woman is mentioned at the end of these three miracles. Jesus reaching down at the lowest level here in the Jewish society and culture. So these are interesting things about these miracles here that I want to point out before we dive into the lesson today. What we're going to do today, very simple. We're going to do three things. We're going to spend our time looking at each of the main characters in the first miracle that's listed here, looking at verses 1 through 4. We're going to first look at the leper himself. Then we're going to look at the divine healer that he comes into contact with, and then we'll wrap up the lesson by looking at three practical applications that you can apply to your life. So let's get started. There's an outline on the back of your bulletin. Take that out and follow along as we study together today. Let's start by taking a few moments to just examine the story and this man that we only know as a leper. And by the way, this is interesting as well. Found this out this week and never really thought about it before. There are only two occasions in the gospel accounts where we read of Jesus cleansing a leper. And this is one of those two instances. We don't know this person's name, but if we go back into Matthew chapter 8 and verse 1, Matthew helps set the scene for us. When it says that he came down from the mountain, this is right after the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has been up on the mountain teaching and preaching. He has now descended from the mountain. Luke tells us he's in the cities of the region. This is probably somewhere around the Sea of Galilee. But Jesus has just finished this up. And notice at the end of the verse it says, great crowds followed Jesus. And again, we're in the area of cities or villages, so it would be natural there'll be a lot of people around. Listen, wherever Jesus went, people were there. There was no person that's ever been more busy than our Savior. From the moment he got up to the moment he went to bed, he's serving people. He's making a difference in people's lives. And that is the case here with this. So we keep going in the text. We're going to learn three things about this leper. We're going to talk for a few moments about his wish. We're going to talk about his will and his request that he makes for Jesus here. But let's get started. Let's talk about his wish. What does he want? Why does he come to Jesus? Well, notice verse 2. He comes to Jesus because he's a leper. And let's just stop with that for just a second, because I think it's important that we understand just what it meant to be a leper in the Jewish society. The word here means simply scaly, scabby, or rough. Now, there are many different types of leprosy that are referred to in the Bible, but this type of leprosy that this man has is the type that probably made him unclean. It's probably the type of leprosy that involved isolation. And if you take the parallel account, by the way, this story is mentioned in all three of the synoptics. It is mentioned here in Matthew 8. You can look at Mark chapter 1, verses 40 through 42, and you can look at Luke chapter 5, verses 12 through 14. And we're going to be looking at all three of those accounts this morning because they give us kind of stereo sound of the whole situation. Talking about the leper, Luke provides us with some information that Matthew and Mark don't. Luke says in verse 12 that he came to Jesus and he was full of leprosy. Now, that's written like a doctor, right? Detailed. And when Luke is writing this, he's probably writing in such a way that is describing a condition that would have been known by everyone. When this man walks up, everybody is going to know he's a leper. He's going to smell, he's going to look, he's just going to be disgusting in the eyes of most people. His condition was probably advanced, and it was something, again, that was clearly visible. And listen, as he is approaching here, I want you to imagine the crowd that is around. Everybody is just in complete shock and horror that he is coming up into the crowd, and you can just probably see people beginning to turn their heads or to walk away. You see, being a leper for a Jew, there was nothing worse. Leviticus chapter 13, verses 44 and 45 provides us details of how the Old Testament dealt with this. Lepers were only allowed in the presence of other lepers. They were cut off from society in every possible way. They were cut off from their family. The only people they could be around were other lepers. For example, here's the other story where we read of a leper being cleansed. It's Luke chapter 17 with the 10 lepers being healed. Notice what is said about them. They were standing at a distance, separated from the rest of the people. These are people that have no family, they have no job, they have no friends, they have no worship, and they have no hope. Now here's something else that's interesting. Did some reading on this week, pulled some resources from here and there, because I just kind of got into this a little bit. The first quote I'm going to give you is from Samuel Jackson, who talks about how the Jews believe that a person who contracted leprosy is having received a judgment from God. And the condition of having leprosy was something that was looked upon as you have sinned in some way. There's some kind of judgment that has come upon you for this. And here's what Jackson says. The Jews were told that it came upon a man for idolatry, blasphemy, unchastity, false judgment, perjury, infringing the borders of a neighbor, devising malicious plans, or creating discord between brothers. So 11 different sins that are mentioned there, and notice how most of these are connected with sins of the tongue. So I guess if you spoke out of turn, beware, because according to the Jews, God was going to bring his judgment on you in this way. Now, notice we go back to our text, back to Matthew chapter 8. We look again at verse 2. He comes to Jesus. He wants to be healed. He wants Jesus to do something about that. And again, when you read that a leper came to him, understand this simply did not happen. It is a violation of every Jewish standard. James Edersheim in his writing says this. He says, in the elaborate code of defilements, leprosy was not only one of the fathers of uncleanness, but next to defilement from the dead stood foremost among them. Not merely actual contact with the leper, but even his entrance defiled a habitation and everything in it to the beams of the roof. Edersheim in his writing also says, if he even put his head in a place, it became unclean. Listen to this. No less a distance than 6 feet must be kept from a leper, or if the wind came from that direction, 100 feet were scarcely sufficient. Rabbi Meir would not eat an egg purchased in a street where there was a leper. Another rabbi boasted that he always threw stones at lepers to keep them far off, while others hid themselves or ran away. I'm telling you, it doesn't get any worse in Jewish society than to be a leper. And now I want to take you to Mark's account. Go with me to Mark chapter 1. Look at verse 40. I'm going to put it on the screen. Okay, and we're going to fill in the blank here. But notice what it says. It says that he came to him imploring him, saying, if you will, you can make me clean. Now, I have read this many times through the years, never really dug into it till I read something this week. One commentator says that in the Greek, the indication here is given that this phrase was repeated several times. So you see this man running up through the crowd, kneeling. Luke says he fell on his face before Jesus. Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. That's the way that this is written. Can you see this? Can you picture this? He's begging. He's pleading. He's desperate. He doesn't care about the shame. He doesn't care about the embarrassment. Somewhere along the line, he has had to hear that Jesus had miraculous power. He may have heard Jesus preach. He is totally confident in the ability of Jesus to heal him. The only question in his mind is, will he do it? Will he do it? Will he follow through? Notice also here how he worships Jesus. Going back to Matthew's account, the leper came and knelt before Jesus. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, Luke says he fell down on his face before Jesus. The synoptics are letting us know that this man put his entire being into what he was doing. I want you to see, I want you to feel, I want you to picture his humility. I want you to see his respectfulness. I want you to think about his reverence for who Jesus is. He approaches Jesus completely empty in spirit. There's no self-reliance here. There's no pride whatsoever. And we take Luke's account in there, and he calls the man Lord. Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Does he see Jesus as the Son of God? Does he see Jesus as the Messiah? He understands that Jesus is his only hope that he'll ever have to have this dreaded disease healed. Again, when you see this, I want you to understand there is nothing irreverent here. There is nothing here that's casual. There's nothing here where he is just taking things for granted. He knows who Jesus is, and he knows who he is. He sees himself for who he is. He's the outcast. He's the one that's been cursed by God. He's the one that's been despised by man. And he comes well aware of his wretchedness. But then we also see his will here. Notice again, back to Matthew, looking at Matthew chapter 8 and verse 2, he says, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. What's first on this man's mind? Now, at first glance, we might say the first on his mind is be healed. Well, I guarantee you that's there, or he wouldn't have approached Jesus. But there's more on his mind there than just being healed. What is first in his mind is the will of Jesus himself. This is, again, not to say he didn't want to be healed. It's obvious that he did. But first in his mind is Jesus and what Jesus wanted. If you are willing, Jesus' will is what is going to decide this for him. And he makes no demands on Jesus. There's no self-will. There's no self-centeredness. There's no self-worth. There's no rights. There's no nothing. He simply casts himself on Jesus' mercy and Jesus' grace. I want to tell you, brothers and sisters, this is the highest level of faith. It's the highest level of faith. I think sometimes we want to bring to Jesus our self-worth. We want to tell Jesus what we're doing and what we're about. That's very much American, by the way. And we have a lot to learn from this story about how we come before the Lord. When we come before the Lord, it is, and we receive his acceptance, it is by his mercy and it is by his grace. Oh, that we would be more humble. Oh, that we would empty ourselves of who we are and cast ourselves on him. He is saying, I know you can heal me, Jesus. I just don't know if you will. Whatever you decide, it's up to you. So that's the leper. Now, what about his divine healer? What do we learn about Jesus here? I think there's three things that we can draw off from in this story to learn about who Jesus is. And for this, I want to take you to Mark's gospel. We're going to look at verse 41 of our text. Notice the first thing Mark says concerning Jesus. He adds this, that Jesus was moved with pity. And by the way, I think as you look at this, you look at all three miracles in the opening chapter of Matthew 8, the opening part. All three of the miracles here, with the leper, with the centurion servant, with Peter's mother, in every instance, Jesus is responding with compassion and pity to the human condition. And by the way, that is exactly what happens when human beings cast their burden on God. In humble faith, the response is always the same. What does Peter say in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 7? Casting your anxiety on him, for he cares for you. What did the psalmist say in Psalm 55? Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved. So Jesus is moving with compassion. But notice also here, notice the touch. Notice here how all three of the synoptic gospels say that Jesus stretched out his hand. All three say exactly the same thing. If the crowd was shocked by the presence of the leper barging up through them to get to Jesus and falling down on his face and kneeling before Jesus, they would have been equally shocked that Jesus stretched out his hand to touch the man. No person, much less a religious person, would ever have defiled himself by touching a leper. And again, we see Jesus responding to the most basic of human needs, the need to be touched. Think about how this reassured the leper. This leper, by the way, he has just put everything, I mean everything on the line. This is it. There is no one else who can help him. It's the moment of truth. And it's obvious here how the Son of God reaching out, condescending himself to an outcast in society that no one else would even approach, much less touch. And it's kind of a foreshadowing of what Jesus is about to say. Notice, and again, it's the same in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Jesus says, I will be clean. It's a simple, direct response to a specific request. Notice, I will. It's written in present tense. And what does that mean for us? For Jesus, there is a continual willingness to help. It's always. It's not in past tense. He's helped me in the past. It's not going to be in the future some way far off. It's now. Jesus has the power to help you now. I will be clean. So by his own authority, Jesus heals this man instantly. And notice here, all three Gospels talk about how it was immediately cleansed. There's no process here where it takes 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks or several months. Immediately, the man's condition went away. Immediately. It's an amazing story, is it not? Now, what does this have to do with an audience in Kettering, Ohio in June of 2019? What does this have to do with us? What can I take away from this today so that I can be a better son or daughter of God? 3 things that I want to approach with. And the first thing that we need to take away from this today is this. See your need for Jesus. Again, I think this is, it's not just an American problem, it's a human problem. It's across our existence. But it's really a big deal for us, I think, here in this country because we've got it so good. Many of us are self-made. We've raised ourselves up from different conditions through life. We've gotten ourselves to where we are today, and we may be thinking we don't need Jesus like we really do. Brothers and sisters, let me encourage you, we all need to see our need for Jesus, and especially when it comes to sin. Leprosy is the personification of sin. And there is a reason why in 2 of these accounts where the lepers are made whole, that the New Testament uses the word cleansed in both of them versus the word healed. Because there's an imagery that's trying to be cast. If you look here in Matthew 8:3, the word cleansed is used. If you look at Luke chapter 17 and verse 14 where the 10 lepers are healed, the word cleansed is used. Why? Because sin is pervasive, sin is ugly, sin is loathsome, it is something that can be transferred to others. We can influence others to sin, in other words. And it's something that's incurable from the human standpoint. Sin makes us an outcast. It makes us aliens and strangers before God. And so what I want us to do is see the ugly, awful, despicable, desperate situation in which sin places you. Kent Hughes in his writing has said, sin controls people through 2 opposing lies. The first is that we're not sinners and nothing is wrong with us. You ever thought that about yourself? I'm not that bad. I've known New Testament Christians say, well, I haven't sinned in 2 or 3 weeks. The arrogance of that. The second is that we're sinners, but we're so bad that we're beyond help. I've known people that believe that. Brothers and sisters, we need to see our desperate need for Jesus. True conversion is never going to happen until we understand who we are and who Jesus is. God is not going to respond to the self-sufficient. God is not going to respond to those who think that they have no need. God is not going to respond to those who think that they can make it on their own. And I think that's one of the great tragedies of much of modern preaching in this country that tries to keep people comfortable. There are a lot of people out there that cannot accept the fact that they themselves are indeed unacceptable before God. But again, we must not go to the other extreme as well that says, well, my condition is so bad, I'm too far gone for God. This story is left for us. It's recorded 3 times for a purpose, and the purpose is to remind us that Jesus is the only one that can deliver us from our sin. No sin is too great. And it's written and recorded here so that we may be reminded that those who do come mourning their condition and overwhelmed by the awfulness of their plight, that there is hope, that there is relief, that there is a remedy. So see yourself for who you are. See your need for Jesus, and then act on your faith. That's another thing that we need to take away from this. The leper's desire for healing was so great that he didn't care about how he looked before others. He didn't care about what others thought. He didn't care about the shame. He didn't care about how people are going to be revulsed by his appearance. He just got up and acted. He got up and he walked. Can you imagine this? I thought about it a lot this week. Here this man, he's been living in social isolation. He sees all these people out there, and he just bursts through the crowd to get up to Jesus. It's kind of like the Red Sea parting as he's going. But can you imagine the courage just to get up and walk and get through that crowd and get to Jesus? That's acting on his faith. He just got up. He just approached Jesus. And by the way, that's what some of you sitting in this room today need to be doing. You know that Jesus can forgive you of your sin. But many sit in the pew week after week after week, knowing what they need to do, holding on to the pew for safety and security, and never respond. If you're in this room today and you know that you need Jesus, you have any question about your salvation, respond. Get up and walk. Act on your faith. It's never going to look. If the leper just sat back in isolation and said, "I know Jesus can do it," but he never actually got up and did something about it, would we be reading this story? Act on your faith. Listen, I know people sitting in this room that are holding on to bad habits. And by the way, if you go to our vision book, you look at pages 6 and 7, you read the faith and action section for this month on the self-evaluation. Some of the things in there talk about bad habits and problems that we face. We just sit back and we're content to live in that misery and agony. Have you actually asked Jesus, actually approached Jesus and asked for help? Are we engaging him in prayer? Are we desperately calling on him in power and his ability to deliver us? Act on your faith. And finally, obey the law of God. Obey the law of God. That's what Jesus tells this man. Look at verse 4. This man's been instantly cured of leprosy. What's the first thing that he tells him to do? Well, see that you say nothing to anyone. That's a whole other lesson, by the way, why Jesus would say that. We're not going to get into that today. But go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. Just follow through. The Lord, listen, God has not saved you to just do nothing. God has saved you to be busy, to be active, and to be living the life. People are not so much interested in what you profess, but they do observe what you do. It is better to say nothing and let the world see how Jesus changed your life by their own examination than for you to shoot off your mouth and not support it by the way that you live. Let people discover for themselves that your life has been changed. Because through your obedience, The light that you're going to be projecting is going to shine through, and it's going to show the transforming power of Jesus Christ. Brothers and sisters, it is your life that speaks. That's exactly what Jim and I were talking about, by the way, on the webcast this morning. It's your life that speaks. So as we close this morning, just very simple question. Doesn't get much more basic than this. Here it is. Have you been cleansed? Have you had your sins washed away? Because that is the only thing that's going to matter on the judgment day. That's it. Have your sins been washed away? Doesn't get much more basic than that. But that's what we need to be thinking about. And every week at this time of the service, this is what we think about. This is what we focus on. Because in the end, this is what matters. Your sins having been washed away, you've acted on your faith, you have repented and turned your life around, you have confessed Jesus as the Son of God, and have you been immersed in water for the remission of sins. That is what's going to matter. It didn't matter how much you heard the preacher, you believed, and you liked what he said. It's going to matter, did I actually follow through? Because Jesus came to the cross. Jesus emptied himself. Jesus walked away from heavenly glory and all the power and prestige to come and live as one of us, to die for one of us. There's pity and compassion and love and care and every kind of heartfelt emotion all wrapped up in that for one. And the question is, you say, well, I know he did all that, but I've got my life and I've got what I want to do and I just don't know. I'll wait. And then it ends. And then what? Then what? That's why Jesus says in Matthew 25:30, hell will be a place of wailing and gnashing of teeth, because there's going to be a lot of people that just, what if only, why didn't I? Because they did not act on their faith. Don't be like them. Be like the leper who took advantage of the opportunity and approached Jesus. Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And what Jesus said to that man will be the same thing you'll say to us. I will be clean. We can serve you in any way this morning. Why don't you come forward as we stand and sing.